So we are recording. I want to thank Caroline Seabolt for joining us today. It's our fifth Arts Media and Communication Alumni Chat of Fall 2021, which I can't believe we're in October already, but we are. I am Jackie Banks, I'm the Arts Media and Communication Advisor here at Colley. Thank you for all of you who are joining, and for those of you who are watching later, I hope you enjoy. So Caroline Seabolt is an arts history and American studies graduate. Am I correct there? So
Correct.
you double major?
American Studies major, art history minor.
Okay. And so currently Caroline is, and I want to make sure I get this correct, is a junior specialist and head of sales for American art at Christie's.
Correct.
Okay. So what I would like, my first question for you, Caroline, is what does that all of that mean? We'll just dive right in, and you can tell us what does that mean?
It's a good question, Jackie. Essentially, my job as a specialist in the American department is doing a lot of things, but to give a bullet point, it's appraising and researching works of American paintings from about the 19th century to the early 20th century for value, for sale. I work with buyers who are looking to buy in our auctions. I also work with sellers who are working to sell in our auctions. That's sort of one facet of my job. The other facet of my job, which is this sort of head of sale role, is I specifically oversee the marketing and the strategy and the overall sort of sale curation for our 2 auctions a year. So right now we're in kind of a deadline getting ready for our November 18th auction. So if you go to Christie's website and you look at upcoming auctions, we have an American art sale on November 18th. Christie's as a company is composed of many different expertise departments. And my particular specialty, you can specialize in post-war and contemporary art, impressionist and modern art, prints, really everything kind of under the sun. I had an interest in American paintings, so that's historical American paintings. So that's my particular focus. And so the sort of works that me and my team focus on are works from about the mid 19th century all the way up to sort of post-war American art. So in a nutshell, as brief as I can keep it, that is essentially what I do on a day-to-day basis.
So I guess, to unpack all of that, because I recognize that some people, and it's hard to know who's on the line, and it's like, I got it, I know what that is. And for some that are just starting to explore what all of this means. But
yeah.
How did you get to the point where you can appraise things? So I'll get a lot of that. So how does one get smart in that area? What does that look like? How did you get there? Are there classes? And that might even go back to like college and what you did in order to prepare, or things that you did beyond that. So,
sure. I think in learning how to appraise a work of art is it not a kind of rocket science formula. It's something I've learned really since I started at Christie's about 4 years ago as a cataloger, which is essentially someone who's responsible for all the research and the writing that goes into the auctions. And from there, you're really just, you have a chance to sort of absorb the specialist kind of valuation process and sit in on, really just kind of learning through osmosis of how more senior team members, the thought through valuations. I mean, in a kind of overarching term, valuing art is a lot of ways similar to valuing real estate, and a lot of it is done by comparable prices. But there's a lot of different factors that go into it, quality, rarity, condition, provenance, the history of a work's ownership. That kind of all comes into one sort of formula, or not really a formula. We take those are all factors we use when we're kind of thinking about a value. But really, for me, it was kind of keeping my ears to the ground and listening to my older colleagues do it and being involved in those sort of meetings and slowly learning to, find your voice in the matter, I would say.
Okay, so it wasn't even that you were taking necessarily specialized classes in appraising. It was more of a learning on the job, and it was a lot of it sounds like more apprenticeship.
Definitely that I would say that respect was I learned on the job. I started out in I started my career at Sotheby's, and for that role, I started out as an administrator, which is someone who is responsible for coordinating logistics for the auction team. So coordinating shipping and consignment agreements and everything in between. And, certainly something that my art history degree and I think my American studies degree to an extent at Georgetown certainly gave me a good overview of kind of the breadth of American art, I would say. And while I was at Georgetown, I interned at the Phillips collection, actually. So I had and they have a wonderful American collection there. So I would say there weren't really classes that prepared me specifically for the job, but I think one thing overall that I took to heart at Georgetown specifically is, these sort of, first jobs at Christie's and Sotheby's are really fast paced, require one to multitask often, think on their feet, and also, be a strong writer, whether that be, writing an email for a colleague, which, to an external client, which can be very important. I think that I learned how to write at Georgetown and I learned how to multitask at Georgetown by, being involved in clubs and taking 5 classes and interning. And I think, I would consider those two things together the things that, set me up for success the most. I think there's a lot of people feel like they have to have an art history degree to work at Christie's, and certainly that interest makes sense to move into a role like this. But I think in reality, it was some kind of more overarching skills that I learned during my time at school that prepared me for this career.
I'm curious, I like on the side, so why I'm looking this way is that I have your LinkedIn screen on the other side.
Okay.
I'm looking at all the things that you've done in the past. So
Yeah.
What pulled you more towards the auction house side than say maybe staying in something that was more gallery or a museum? Like what was it? Especially as I'm thinking for those in the call or listening who are maybe on the art and museum studies program, that's the master's program, or even for those that are starting to just explore generally. So what's the feel of those different areas, and maybe why did you choose auction houses?
Sure. So my first arts internship, as I mentioned, was in the Phillips collection. I worked in their education department. It felt like a natural segue for me because I was involved in DC Reads, which was the, I think, on-campus nonprofit reader program that I think is still on at Georgetown. So to me, that felt like a natural segue to get into the art world. And I really loved my time there. I was originally signed on for just a spring internship, and I decided to stay through the summer. And, I think at the end of the day, like I said, I was the type of person that I think I wanted something a little bit more fast paced. I think I also was hoping for something that was a bit more hands-on in the art world. And I think one thing that someone said to me a long time ago about the difference between auction houses and museums is, a museum is going to want you to have the academic qualifications first before you can jump into the job. And an auction house is almost, in my opinion, like somewhat vice versa. They're going to want you, they're just going to basically teach you more or less on the job. And, your qualifications obviously matter, but it's not the kind of barrier to entry to get in. And I certainly liked that about it. I like the idea of learning on the job. And I think, I interned at Phillips, and then I interned at an arts nonprofit called Americans for the Arts. It's in DC. And, because I thought I might be a government minor at the time. And that it was probably for sure my least favorite internship, to speak kind of candidly. I think mixing the arts and government for me, it wasn't really like a personal fit. And so to me, I thought, okay, I've mixed art and education at the Phillips Collection. I've done arts and government. Now, what about, art and business? And so that's how I started looking at Christie's and Sotheby's. And I loved the idea specifically about the auction houses, that you could have a specialty, so that there was this whole department that was dedicated exactly to the area that I was interested in, and handled hundreds of objects a year. And that really, I think, intrigued me and drew me to the auction world specifically. And then when I got in, I never left.
Yeah. So, okay. So say we have some folks on the call, and I'm sure and who are listening, I'm sure this is the fact where they're like, okay, I want to work at auction houses. That's definitely, I do want to do that.
Yeah.
So if we're thinking both internships and jobs, what would you say, like maybe advice wise, what would you advise them, whether it's timelines or whether it's networking or anything that they should keep in mind as they're starting to really kind of put their foot forward towards this path?
Well, I think that it's definitely, having conversations with people who are, are working, in the, at these places, and kind of getting their candid advice is really, I think, is really valuable. I did it a lot while I was at Georgetown. And I think it's also important to get a lot of different opinions, because not everyone's, I think, path to an auction house is the same. I also think that in terms of, I can speak specifically to Christie's and to some extent Sotheby's. I started out with Sotheby's after I finished my internship, I came back as a kind of temporary hire. And I did that for about 3 months. And then Christie's also hires after your senior year at school. Once you've graduated, they have temps and interns that come for the fall sales and help in the fall and spring sales. And I think that both houses, at least Christie's does, that sort of group of people that come to help during the sales season when there is an opening. They internally, I think people prefer to hire from that sort of internal pool. It's really, I think, a lot harder to get hired in an external full-time position without any prior experience. So that would be kind of my number one advice, would be to not shrug off, if you can, an internship or a temporary role, because that's really the pool that at least I know Christie's is looking at, when it's time to come to fill a full-time position, because then, if we have an opening on our team, I can call my colleague in the prints department and say, oh, how was Jackie? How'd she do during sales season? And then, you say, oh, she was great. She handled deadline really well. And she, kind of understands, someone who I think understands the company culture. And in my experience, most of the entry-level jobs that we filled have come through that role. So that would be my advice for and I would try to do it as soon as you can, to be honest. We do have people who used to come through the Christie's education department. And I do feel like while they certainly learned a lot, they brought a lot to the table, I think there's still a lot to be learned on the job. So I don't necessarily feel like, you would need to go out and work at a gallery or something like that before applying for one of those roles. They are truly looking for people like right out of college.
Yeah, that's going back to your informational interviews usually, and and remember, like that's usually the thing that's the scariest for it. Then it doesn't matter undergrad or grad to
Yeah.
do, but it sounds that it's important because it establishes your interest in a lot of these places, and you get to learn a little bit about the culture. So, what would you say to somebody who is nervous about doing an informational interview? That yes, it's crucial, and this is why. It sounds as though you're saying an informational interview is pretty crucial because that's how you get to know a little bit more about the nuances of the organization and how people get to know you.
I think certainly don't be afraid. I think, two things. One, people inherently like to talk about themselves. So if you come and ask someone to tell you their life story, I think more than of how they got there, I think more than oftentimes you'll get a positive response. I also think that for the people that I've had kind of Georgetown students and students I went to high school with, reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I think that's sort of kind of initiative in reaching out to someone you don't know to me, at least, that shows like drive and kind of that you're a go-getter. And I think, for the most part, I've been impressed. I mean, I think in the examples that I'd say the only negative feeling I've personally had towards anyone ever reaching out to me is when, someone reaches out to me to schedule a call and I say, great, I'd be happy to talk to you. Here's my work email address. Please email me and we'll set up a time. And then they don't follow up. So that would be my only advice to people who, if someone is willing to take the time to be willing to talk to you and you ask, like, to follow through on it itself. That's my one piece of advice.
Right, the professionalism that goes along with that. So, because
right.
You remember that too. So if they come across,
right.
remember, right? So, and you talked about this a little bit before, and also like with informational interviews, like it takes initiative, it takes drive to do all those things. So I'm thinking about skills that you see that make someone successful there. So it sounds like you said multitasking.
Yep.
And I said initiative, drive. And I would imagine language skills, depending on, especially the department. So what language it might depend.
Yep.
But I don't know if you could think about if there are particular skills that either you look for or that Christie's looks for, unless unless it's so department dependent. But if there's a way to kind of speak broadly about skills that people would be looking for.
I think it's a good question. I'll try to answer both. I think one thing I'm particularly looking for is someone who is, I think, being a really effective communicator is really important, especially when one is starting out in a new role, because in the reality, you're not going to know everything starting out in a new job. But I think knowing when something, doesn't make sense to you, or, perhaps when, you're not exactly sure who the right, person to go to is, being an effective communicator and writing emails effectively, as kind of mundane as it sounds, is a very important thing here at Christie's, I think. And, I think you also, to a certain level, there's a lot of different, personalities at the company. There's, my team's really young. We're pretty much all under 40. There's also certain teams where, there's people who have been at the company for 30 years and have a certain way of doing things. And, you'll find that in many different roles, but I think knowing how to sort of juggle multiple personalities and is really important. I think having strong client service skills is really crucial. One specific thing that actually prepared me more for my job at Christie's, I don't want to say than Georgetown, but was my waitressing job at the Tombs. And when I had to be on the phone with, I had to, talk to clients or to customers on the phone and wait tables, taught me excellent customer service skills. And when I came to my internship at Sotheby's, I knew how to talk on the phone to clients because I had that experience. So, working in a restaurant job or, some sort of retail job, it would actually, I think, serve someone who's looking to get into a client service industry really well.
That is really helpful because I think a lot of times students downplay that, and it's incredibly helpful to have those skills and the multitasking that goes along with it, handling challenging customers or all of those pieces.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, just so you know, in the chat, someone asked about the summer internship. So I did a little search. Looks like they are, Christie's is starting and the deadline is December, I believe. So that's just FYI. For whomever asked, Sydney, I think.
Yes.
I just saw that on LinkedIn, and beyond that, I don't know too much about that. I don't know, Caroline.
So what I know about our internship program, I believe, and we can confirm with our HR department, but I believe the summer internship program is reserved for undergrads who are rising seniors. I think, and that's how it was previously. It could have changed, but I know, my sort of kind of off the record opinion is that, the summer internships are great and a kind of a great, entry point, certainly, but one will get, if you can, a more sort of kind of boots on the ground experience if you work a fall or spring sales season, because that's when you're really assisting during deadlines and auctions, because our business is really seasonal. Summer can be kind of quiet. So you may not be getting as much work as you would in a fall or spring sales season. I know timing is everything, but in general, the art world gets somewhat quiet in the summer in general, I would say.
Yeah, I just did a little bit more of a search. So if there's an undergraduate online, yes, it looks like it's open to rising juniors and seniors in their undergraduate studies. So not to graduate students, but that doesn't, so it looks like, Caroline, you mentioned like temporary work as well. Is that a possibility too, to kind of keep an eye out for?
Absolutely. I know we look for temps all year round. Definitely. And those, I think, are, like I said, while an unglamorous title, very valuable opportunities, if you can also stay on for longer. I think the internships, if I recall, in the summer, they go 6 weeks at a time. There's a group that goes 6 weeks and a B group. And with it, if you're in a kind of a temporary position, you could stay the whole summer. And in my opinion, you get more exposure towards the right people at the company. And those come up, all year round on an as needed basis. So definitely something to keep a lookout for.
Okay. So, it's funny. It's like, as I look up alumni who are doing different work at auction houses, I often see that they're either have their masters or in your case, looks like you're getting your masters.
Well, I finished, but
you finished. Finished. Okay.
Yeah.
So is that usually another step? So a lot of times I'll get asked about if they're starting in the industry, if it's required to get a master's, or how soon, or what does that look like, even broadly speaking?
I personally don't feel like it's required. It certainly doesn't hurt. Certainly coming in with that sort of experience, and that sort of art historical knowledge, it's absolutely going to help you. I think if getting a full-time job at Christie's or Sotheby's or an auction house is your number one priority as quickly as possible. And if you're a senior, I would tell you to not go to school. If you're not sure or any, that's a different thing. No, I don't personally feel like it's something that's necessary. The way in which I got my master's was a little different than other people. I went to school part-time while I was working at Sotheby's, and, I was an administrator for quite a long time at Sotheby's, and kind of knew what I was doing and wanted to kind of further my, self and challenge myself. And so Hunter College in New York offers a part-time program a part-time master's in art history program, in which you can go to school at night. And Sotheby's at the time, I'm not sure if they still have this, they subsidized part of your education. So I did that for 2.5 years, went to school at night while I was at Sotheby's. And then when I switched to Christie's, I was at sort of the position, it was a switch to the position I wanted. And, I probably, frankly, could have stopped, but I was, had basically finished the coursework and was stubborn and wanted to finish it. So that was a silver lining of the pandemic, is that with things a bit slower, I was able to finally finish up everything last year. So it was a bit of a sort of winding path for me. But in terms of people who are kind of in school right now and looking for a next career step, no, it's not something that I feel is 100% prerequisite to looking for positions.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
There's sometimes I also get asked about geographic location. So what would you say if a student is saying, I'm interested in auction houses, is New York the thing? Is that the place to go, or are there other possibilities across the United States?
So I'll be honest, New York's pretty much the main place to go, especially starting out. However, some other advice I've given to younger people who are looking to kind of get a foothold in this industry is to, not discount smaller regional auction houses. I'll give you a few names that I know have, a big presence in Chicago, Leslie Heineman Auctions. Bonhams has a big presence in the West Coast. They're also in New York. Heritage Auctions has a presence in kind of I think in Texas and the Southwest and the West. And frankly, I mean, that is usually an instance in which, speaking that sort of same auction lingo, if you were to go to one of those smaller houses and intern, for example, and then you have that on your resume, that's typically, I think, more impressive than interning at a museum or something like that. And people don't really think to look at the smaller regional houses, and you still learn a lot of the same processes and things. And just because sometimes there can be such a big barrier to entry at Christie's and Sotheby's, those to me, I kind of think of as a good backdoor, because they teach you a lot of the same material. And they're still pretty highly regarded in terms of when, if you were to apply to a Christie's and Sotheby's role.
No, that's really helpful. I'm also thinking too about, going back to Georgetown, are there any classes that you took that were particularly helpful, or professors that were helpful to you in this path? It sounds like maybe so, or maybe, or any classes or courses that you wish you took and you didn't?
Let's see. Well, Professor Al Akers, I don't know if he's still in the art history department, but he certainly helped influence a love of all things, sort of art history and visual culture. For me, it taught me that, the classes I took with him were intro to art history, and then Italian Renaissance art and Northern Renaissance art. And even though those aren't my specialties, being able to learn taught how to look at a painting and, dissect it and understand the different sort of visual qualities in it is something I use in my job every single day. Professor Pralinger was my thesis advisor, and I loved working with her. She, being to kind of on top of that, Hugh Cloak was part of the American Studies program when I was there. I believe he might have retired. But I loved the American Studies program. Was an amazing thing for me because it kind of lets you build your own major, and I built it kind of around American art. I think in a non sort of art course I took that's coming to me, my senior year, I took public speaking, and that was a great course that I use, I think, and reference about all the time, because so much of my job is giving talks to clients. I had to public speak at events twice last week. I've public spoke many times in my career so far. So that to me is definitely one that I found very valuable at Georgetown.
That's really helpful too. So it's either, I want to make sure if people still have room in their schedules and they can take it, that they can do that. So really, I come down to kind of the end of my questions, and my last question always to alumni is there anything I didn't ask? Is there any advice that you would want to leave with folks? Anything you can think of?
I would say the sort of, there seems to be, I think, at least, and I felt like this when I was looking at jobs in this field, and, I get that sense from people I still talk to, is that I think there's a larger barrier to entry than what people might imagine. And just don't be afraid to, reach out to people. And, I think that showing initiative and having those initial conversations, I think it works out more often than not when people do that. So I think the art world in general can seem opaque and kind of scary, but I think it's just all about getting information and trying different things. I also think that a place like Christie's or Sotheby's, there's a lot of different things one can do at the company. We have a press department, we have a marketing department, we have a legal department. You can, just because, you don't have to be a sort of specialist or work directly with the art every day to work at a company like this. And I think that's one thing I definitely didn't think about as much when I was applying. So, there's a lot of different sort of opportunities within each company.
Great. Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do now is that for those of you who are watching this in the record, thanks for watching and joining. I'm going to stop the record right now so anyone who's currently with us can ask any questions they want. So,
sure.
Thanks.